Now, what exactly can we learn from the success of indigenous communities in Brazil? Well, our first speaker believes that our lifestyles need drastic change. But how? Well, the Ashaninka tribe in Brazil has developed a perfectly sustainable and balanced way of living in their own small community. And our first speaker, Zeb Murphy, is here to tell us all about it. Please take to the stage, Zeb.
9 years ago, I watched a pig get slaughtered and skinned alive in front of me. A couple of hours later, I was eating bacon for dinner. After my family and I flew to a small village inside the Amazon rainforest, boarded a scrappy 5-seater jet, and rode an Amazon riverboat for 6 hours, we arrived at the Apuchta village. Deep in the jungle and home to a couple hundred members of the Peruvian and Brazilian Ashaninka indigenous peoples. I remember arriving onto this little port made of mud, and immediately being swarmed by children, dialogue, footballs, and coconuts. They brought me and my family up to the main center of the village, where a man came up to me and asked, "What would you like for dinner?" And as one could assume a hungry 8-year-old boy to reply with, I said, "Bacon," meaning it as somewhat of a joke. But a couple of hours later, as I was playing football with a young boy who befriended me, I saw 2 men putting a squealing pig by the neck before tying it down in the center of the village and bashing it multiple times with a machete until the screaming stopped. My family and I were appalled. But looking around, we were alone in this. They skinned the animal, cut it into pieces, and then said in Portuguese to my vegan mother, "There's your son's bacon." At the time, I was disgusted, thinking how could they so callously and guiltlessly do that? But the way that the Ashaninka kill and prepare their meat is far more ethical, far more humane than the majority of the meat the Earth's population is consuming, including me and including all of you. Well, to put it into perspective, picture yourself walking through a supermarket, searching for your breakfast bacon. You're strolling through the aisles, and you find a nice-looking packet for £4. You buy it at the counter, and as you're leaving, you think, well, that was a good deal. But how utterly blind are you in doing so? Choosing to consider this animal's life as a good bargain over the true blessing that it is. Those men in the tribe knew exactly what work went into taking care of the animal, and they knew exactly what pain it was feeling in that moment. They could see it, they could hear it, but most importantly, this allowed them to understand and appreciate the true value of it. It wasn't £4, but it was a life that they were ending to fulfill the hunger of me and of the community. These indigenous tribes who live on the ground know the real cost of things. Not cost in money, but cost in value. And this is one of the many reasons that they are living a far more sustainable and correct lifestyle than the rest of the world. And I'm of the strong opinion that if the whole world could harness this way of life that the Ashaninka live by, there is hope for our future and for our planet. Now, firstly, I want to present to you a rather devastating statistic. Today, we need about 1.87 planets to provide the resources for our consumption and absorb our waste. And by 2030, we will need 2. Humankind can do a lot of great things, but create another Earth, I don't think is possible. For thousands of years, the Ashaninka have flourished in the area they take up in the jungle, living in deep connection to the land they occupy, seeing it as not something to exploit, but rather as something sacred, a living entity to respect and nurture. They see themselves as part of the land, not in ownership of it. And this gives them a strong incentive to prepare the land for all future generations to come. A way in which they do this is through their responsible use of resources. They only consume what they immediately need. Although they collect their resources in similar ways to us, through farming, foraging, hunting, they never deplete or permanently damage the environment they're living in. Take, for example, the Ashaninka would hunt rare birds just for the fun of it, but the amount that they kill is so negligible that they remain part of the food chain. They are natural predators, unlike us. In our industrial model, there is a linear consumption pattern, where, say, for example, Water from France is packaged into a plastic bottle, sent to your local Tesco's in Cardiff, where then you as the consumer go to the store, buy it, drink the water, and throw the bottle away. The Ashaninka live with a circular economy. They use every product to its fullest potential and ensure minimal waste. For example, something I remember quite well were the Fiora Euro seeds, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. These seeds had a wonderful double use. I remember being told to spend an entire day picking the seeds out of their shells, filling one pot up with the outer shell and one pot up with the inner bead. The pots were then sent to the village craftspeople, who would create tubs of paint from the shells and beautiful jewellery and other forms of necklaces from the inner beads. And these craftspeople is an example of one of the vast everyday jobs that the Ashaninka people would carry out. Vast everyday jobs that were known by every other member of the community. They lived in a visible, systematic society. So for example, these craft makers who are making jewellery, not only are they making jewellery, but they're making beautiful garments for all the men and women in the village. And these garments are made out of wild cotton. But where do they get the wild cotton? Well, they definitely don't purchase it. The wild cotton was foraged by those members of the community who had been out in the rainforest all day, foraging for all sorts of resources to use for medicinal, culinary, and artistic purposes. And upon returning these foraged goods back to the tribe, there are people who then spend their time sorting them out into what is immediately needed and what they can preserve for the future. And as all of this was going on, the hunters and fishermen had been out on their boats all day, throwing large nets into the river and catching huge quantities of fish to share with the tribe. I remember in my time accompanying quite a few kids and teenagers on their little fishing trips. They take the boat hours down the river and take it in turns, throwing nets into the river before diving down with spears and coming up with huge quantities of fish. Me, I don't think I even caught half a fish. But something I was good at was collecting coconuts. This would involve taking a tall bamboo stick and bashing these tall coconut trees until the coconuts would fall down. Here's a picture of me with one of the coconuts I so proudly collected. But as with the fish which are hunted, the resources which are foraged, and the coconuts which are collected, they are all shared communally within the tribe. But more importantly, every member of the tribe is doing something to fulfill the fruitful life of the entire community. And they can all see and appreciate the work that other members are putting into it. They appreciate each other. In our world, because we live such vast distances away from our production lines, and most jobs are in solitude, although someone's amazing, intensive work may be hugely impactful, they are unaware of the entire system they are incorporating in. And this leads to two things. Firstly, a lack of understanding. Consumers like us, perhaps not intentionally, don't understand the environmental, social, or human consequences of our consumption. And this leads to an increased demand in cheap mass production. Secondly, it leads to a selfish individual economy. Humans are encouraged to be individualistic, which although is part of what makes us great, it gives us the incentive to make decisions which benefit mainly ourselves and those directly around us. Whereas in the Ashaninka's tribe, they live with collective values, where every single decision made by anyone should be beneficial to the entire community, not just to themselves. And in our world, there does exist an unfortunate outlook that these indigenous communities are somehow ancient, or less developed, less civilized forms of society. In fact, 1950s modernization theorist Walt Whitman Rostow would argue that indigenous communities are in their first stage of societal development and should be on their way to mimic Western superpowers, which is what these Western superpowers have enforced on other smaller nations, encouraging them to become a place where wealth and the mass production of consumer goods is widespread. But where has this led us? This has led us to the need for two Earths. And these people with such strong opinions that the world is for the taking have caused serious threat and danger to the Ashaninka community. For example, in the 1980s, their way of life was threatened by loggers, trying to kick them out of their land in order to exploit it for its natural resources. But what did the Ashaninka do? Did they let their land get taken? No, they fought back. And the main way in which they did this was by adapting. They adapted to understand the world outside of them that was threatened, to understand it politically, and and socially. And this involved sacrificing parts of their secrecy, which is what originally led my mother there in the 1980s and me there as an 8-year-old boy. Today, for example, the Aboriginal village have a satellite Wi-Fi router. They have a home phone, and they even have a Facebook page, which I strongly recommend you check out. I'll leave it up for a second so you can grab a photo. But through sacrificing parts of their secrecy, they were able to fight back, and they also did this by allowing members of the tribe to leave the community and to do something in the outside world that we all know. For example, the man you can see in this photo is Benki Biako. He was the prince of the community when I went there, but is now the founder and president of the Urenka Tazarensti Institute, an organization working from within the forest, which works for the preservation of the Amazon rainforest and the preservation of the deep cultural knowledge and culture that indigenous communities can provide in the world. And his brother Isaac da Silva Piako went down a slightly different path. He left to pursue a formal education and is now a politician in the Legislative Assembly of ACRE. So as you can see, the Ashaninka in the modern age did have to sacrifice part of their livelihood, but it was to survive. And if the Ashaninka could do this, then can we not sacrifice parts of our livelihood, parts of our way of life, in order to survive in our current planet? Because we do only have the one. So imagine, well, this is the small village, the Aboriginal village in which the Ashaninka occupy. But imagine their amazing way of life, which I've been describing, were to grow and grow to eventually surround our entire planet. What would our new sustainable way of life look like? Well, firstly, we would be connecting more with true value. As a consumer, the next time you're in the mall searching for clothing, kitchen appliances, food, whatever be it, remember that most industries you're buying into are systems which encourage the abuse of life, labor, and the environment. As consumers, we must begin to value resources not in terms of money, but in terms of the impact on our planet. We should also be using resources responsibly. We must shift away from mass consumption. We must learn to embrace a mindset of enough. Rather than overproducing and consuming for 2 Earths, learn to live within the natural limitations of our one and only planet. We should also adopt circular economies. Our current world works on a heavy make, use, dispose economy, but we should shift towards more circular economies such as recycling and reusing. The shareholders of the earth must be encouraged to make systems where products are made to last and waste is seen as a resource, not a byproduct. We should also be connecting more truly to our land. The industrial world sees land as a commodity, which leads to terrible industries such as deforestation, mining, poaching. If we could adopt this mindset that the Ashaninka have, that land is sacred, unexploitable, what solutions could we come up with in terms of preserving our earth for all future generations to come, and for us living here today? And lastly, we should adopt visible systems. Since the Ashaninka participate in every step of their production line, they are able to understand the cost of their consumption, and understand that everything they're consuming or doing comes from the hard work of those around them. In our world, we must make our production lines more visible, because currently the consumers have a disregard for consequences, and it's not their fault. But if only we could have transparency in production lines, what sort of decisions could you as a consumer start making? Now, circling back to my first line, although today I do try not to eat bacon, when I am eating it, I remember that feeling in my stomach from so many years ago, listening to those cries in that pig's final moments. Although back then I didn't know it, it is so clear to me now how strong and honourable those men were in carrying out those actions. And that allows me to appreciate and understand the true value of my bacon. And I apply the same to anything that I consume, use, or even any opportunity that I'm given. And I know that these ideologies are a lot for me to ask for. You may be sitting there thinking, yeah, that's great, but what am I supposed to do about it? Well, take a moment and think about who you are, and who the people sitting next to you are. Let me give you a hint. You are the new generation, at least those of you near my age. You are the foreseeable future of humankind. So although my words may just be the silly words of a 17-year-old, in a room full of young people who will become the change makers of our generation, my words can, and I'm sure will, make a difference. Let's all follow the Ashaninka's brilliance. Let's come together collectively, because if only you knew the power we would have if we all worked together, our world could change, just one collective choice at a time. Thank you.